We aren't even at the point where Square Enix are ready to announce the release date for the first part of the Final Fantasy VII Remake yet, but what's next seems to be a question that's popping up on a much more regular basis. I mean, it does make sense. Despite Final Fantasy VII being the most popular game in the franchise in both general hype and sales, that doesn't necessarily mean it's everyone's cup of tea. Lest we forget that other installments in the pre-PS2 era also sold well and each have their own sets of fans, and I'm pretty sure they would be rather excited if Square Enix suddenly announced that they were, for example, also working on a remake of Final Fantasy VI or even Final Fantasy VIII. But as I mentioned, this question has been cropping up more regularly, and the latest response came from a somewhat unlikely source. Takashi Katano, the director of Final Fantasy XII, the Zodiac Age. He was being interviewed by the UK division of International Business Times and was asked about the future of remakes as well as what the next remake is likely to be. In response, Katano said, "Final Fantasy XII is a PlayStation 2 title, and if you look at the other titles in the series, technologically, anything before the PS2 era is going to be quite difficult to do a modern remaster to a suitable level of quality. That means a future game is far more likely to be a remake than a remaster." Now, I would like to point out that Katano did say they will be more likely to do remakes as opposed to remasters, but you never know. For example, they could decide to tackle the Lightning Saga next. It's something that I feel people have been waiting for, and with various other titles from the PlayStation 3 era getting this exact treatment on the PlayStation 4, like Tomb Raider, The Last of Us, Uncharted 1, 2 and 3, God of War 3 and Gravity Rush, it's not too much of a stretch to think that a collection featuring Final Fantasy XIII, Final Fantasy XIII Part 2 and Lightning Returns has to have at least been considered at Square Enix. As a follow-up question, they asked Katano which game would be next in the pipeline as a remake, and Katano gave a rather interesting answer. Instead of offering his personal preference as we've seen in the past, he said, "We really have to hear the fans' voice on that. If they want to see a remake or a remaster of a certain game, then it's more likely to be the one we go for." He noted that he's personally been working at Square Enix for 20 years now, and he's got a lot of memories from that time, and said, "I think the way we look at it is that it's not the game that we would like to remake, it's really down to what the players, the fans, what they want to see." It's actually a mantra that Square Enix seems to hold dear, where they note that they'll look to do something if there's interest from the community or the fans, and more often than not, if there is genuine interest, then they do deliver on it. What's next as a follow-up from the Final Fantasy VII Remake is up for debate though, and as I mentioned, this question has been cropping up quite a bit since the Final Fantasy VII Remake was announced. VentureBeat, for example, didn't even let the dust settle and asked Nomura just days after its big E3 unveiling about what would be next, Final Fantasy VIII or Final Fantasy IX. Nomura was actually keen to point out that, of course, Final Fantasy VII isn't the first game in the franchise that has been remade, and he's very much correct. Even though they didn't receive anywhere near the same level of fanfare as they were on handheld consoles, they have already remade Final Fantasy I and II, which released on the Game Boy Advance and PlayStation Portable, and Final Fantasy III and IV, which released on the Nintendo DS. And if it were up to Nomura, the next step after remaking Final Fantasy VII would be to go back and work on Final Fantasy V and VI, as he doesn't necessarily agree with skipping them in favour for the Final Fantasy VII remake. Final Fantasy V is also the first game that he personally worked on, so there's some sentimental value there for him. If we flash forward to January of this year, where following the Final Fantasy 30th anniversary opening ceremony, Yoshinori Kitase was being interviewed by Famitsu, and during this interview he was asked point blank by the interviewer, "Why aren't you remaking Final Fantasy VI?" And he kind of let slip that actually the staff within the company are also saying they want to do a remake of Final Fantasy VI, but it continues to be put off, which was quite an interesting statement. But anyway, which of the games would you want to be remade? Would you be happy with either Final Fantasy V or VI, going along with Nomura, who wants to continue remaking the games in chronological order? Or would you prefer that they just skip to one of the other PlayStation titles like Final Fantasy VIII or IX? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to hit that like button and subscribe! If you'd like to support our channel, head over to our Patreon at patreon.com/FFunion. You can find out how you can suggest video topics, get badges, and get your name at the end of videos like these awesome folks. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. This is Daryl signing out. We will see you next time.